Hey guys, Triple B here. With Obsidian Flames just around the corner, figured it'd be a good idea to get a buy list out there. So if you're on the fence about what cards you should be picking up, give you a little bit of a hand. These are the cards that I at least think are going to be good and worth having in your collection and may become staples in the future. If you have a different opinion, or maybe if I missed a card that you think has a lot of potential, let me know in the comments down below. But to get into it, we'll start off with what I think will be staple cards coming out of the set. Pretty small list, to be honest, with only 6 cards that I think everybody should pick up. First one's going to be the new supporter card Gita, and I'm going to recommend picking up 4 copies of this because I do think there will be decks that can run it as just a quad way of getting your Pokemon set up. There's going to be great options like Duraludon VMAX. Currently, you're having to run it with Arceus V-Star. If you miss attachment for turn on the first turn, like if you don't have a basic or a DTE, you're kind of playing catch up the rest of the game. You need to get that Arceus online. You need to get it on the bench, evolving up, same with the Duraludons, and it can be a little bit tricky. So having Gita, it's going to let you just search your deck for 2 energy cards and attach them to one of your Pokemon. Trade-off being you can't attack that turn though. There's not a lot of decks where you're really getting valuable attacks off the first turn anyway, so as long as you're running accounts of Pokegear to make sure you're getting into Gita, or even a Luminion to bench and guarantee getting into Gita, you're in an alright spot. With Duraludon as well, it's not a V-Star Pokemon, so you could be using Forest Seal Stone just to help get into this card a little bit more consistently as well, so it's a great option. The other thing to keep in mind, you're charging up that Pokemon, it easily becomes a target for your opponent, so they're going to try and boss it up. But if you're just running 4 copies of Diancie as well, you sit Diancie in the active, all of a sudden your opponent can't boss up your guy. They can use Escape Rope to get around it, so running 4 Diancies, you ideally want 1 in the active, 1 on the bench. They Escape Rope, just switch into another Diancie, and it prevents them from just gust killing that guy that you're trying to charge up. The next card I'm going to recommend is Letter of Encouragement. You can only play this card when one of your Pokemon was knocked out, similar to Raihan, except it's an item card, and it's going to let you search your deck for 3 basic energy cards. So sort of like Energy Search, beefed up a little bit, and a bit more situational. Can be great as a bit of a comeback card, and a lot of decks are trying to flood energy from their hand, like Chin-Pao decks that are running Frigibacks. Chin-Pao can get 2 energy from the deck just by being in the active. Letter of Encouragement, get another 3. Rush those out, you're doing 300 damage. Pretty solid. There's also Cherim that can do the similar thing with grass energy, and we've got some other Pokemon that can kind of cheat energy out in that way as well. So great inclusion in most decks. I'd recommend only picking up 2. I don't think this will really be a 4-off in many decks. If you want to go for 4 though, it wouldn't be a bad idea either. The next cards I'm going to recommend is actually going to be a 1-2 combo, being Pidgey and Pidgeot. I'm going to say pick up probably 2 copies of each. Seems like a very interesting card to play around with. It has an ability that's similar to Arceus V-Star. You get to search for any card. Arceus doing 2, but only once per game. Pidgeot doing 1 and just once per turn, so it is reusable. It is a stage 2 Pokemon, so a little bit awkward, but with EX Pokemon making a comeback, you're seeing a lot of rare candies in decks. So Meowscarada's doing it, Frigibax decks are doing it. Kind of one of those things that if you're already running a stage 2 Pokemon, why not slot this in as a 1-1 line or a 2-2 line? Gives you more reason to include extra copies of rare candy, so you could be running 4 in decks where you'd only really need to use 3 ever. Now you just have the Pidgeot there. It's an excuse to have some extras for consistency, and Pidgeot giving even more consistency is a great option. Also going to recommend picking up the new Stadium cards. So the first one, Pokemon League Headquarters, makes basic Pokemon's attacks cost 1 colorless energy more. It's a great counter to Lost Box, as well as some other decks that are starting to see a bit more play. I'm always going to recommend picking up Stadiums and Special Energies as they come out, because you never know when you might need them, and they're not usually too hard on the bank. Usually only costing like 50 cents to $1. The other one, Town Store, lets you search your deck for a Pokemon Tool card once per turn. It's basically just a, hey, do you run Forest Seal Stone? Yeah, that lets you get guaranteed into a card. This has a guaranteed way to get into Forest Seal Stone. It's a really great option and adds even more consistency to decks. Also, just having it out to like Choice Belts, Experience Share, stuff like that, I could definitely see it coming up in other decks as well. The next thing we're going to get into is cards that I think are at least worth having. So these aren't necessarily staples, but could definitely see some plays as a one-off tech in decks in the future. So the first batch being Lunatone and Solrock is a powerful combo. Lunatone has an ability that if you have a Solrock in play, Stadium cards in play do not affect your Pokemon. So you could be running Path to the Peak and it's not going to bother you. It's going to shut off your opponent's abilities, but your Pokemon won't be affected. So you could be running Arceus and put Path down first turn before even using your V-Star power and not have to worry about anything. It's kind of funny. Or a Chin Pao into a mirror match, maybe you run this. Maybe not specifically that deck because it's already pretty tight for deck space, but just as an example, definitely seems like something that has some potential. There's also a new Mawile card coming out that does 30 damage for each psychic energy attached to it. This is one that I don't think is going to immediately see play, but once rotation hits, Gardevoir EX is going to lose some of its big attackers, being the Gardevoir and the Zacian from Celebrations. This seems like a definite inclusion in Gardevoir in the future, since we're getting that Stadium card that you can discard a psychic energy from your hand to heal 30 damage off guys. Mawile, you can just accelerate a energy to it. It does have 100 health, so it could only get up to 4 energy, not hitting very big numbers. You can attach a Bravery Charm though, give it a little bit more HP and use that Stadium for a bit more. Maybe Picnic Basket starts seeing play in it, not too sure, but could definitely be a card that starts seeing some play in the future. And again, it's going to be probably like a 50-cent piece. Why not pick it up? The other psychic Pokemon that I think may be relevant in the future is Clefable EX. It's got an ability that makes it so your psychic Pokemon with energy attached have free retreat. Psychic decks are now kind of flooding energy out all over the place. Gardevoir can cheat them out. Clefable evolving from a Clefairy that has an ability that when it's in the active, accelerate energy to your other Clefairy in play. It's just an interesting inclusion for that, and even in that could just become more of a deck in the future. It also has an attack doing 170 damage, so it's not too bad. You can be two-shotting into stuff. And the final psychic Pokemon I'm going to recommend is Togekiss. So there's a Togepi and Togetic in this set as well. Not really recommend them since we did have ones that when you play them, they heal some damage off, which is pretty clutch. And the Togekiss has an ability that at the end of your turn after you attack, you can draw until you have 8 cards in your hand, which seems solid. So it definitely seems like an option that decks that are a little bit more on the tanky side, like Goodra or Kuparaja EX, could start to use, since the Togetic and Togepi would be healing, and then Togekiss just becoming a draw option. Definitely interesting, and I could see us getting a Togekiss EX in the future, and this would just be a great split evolution line to be running in that. Next up, I'm going to recommend the Finizen and Palafin line. Probably just pick it up as a 1/1. You could go for a 2/2. Interesting attackers here. So Finizen has an attack that for 1 water energy, search for a Palafin, evolve into it and move to the bench. And Palafin has 2 pretty solid attacks in Jet Punch, doing 30 to the active and 30 to one of your opponent's bench Pokemon to kind of help set up numbers. Its second attack does 210, but only if it moved from the bench to the active. Pretty solid number. The fact that you can be finishing things off with Jet Punch as well, like 210 in something, you're not one-shotting basic EXs or anything like that, but Jet Punch then finishing them off later could be clutch. Might become like an inclusion into water decks as just a 1/1 line for a single prize attacker. The fact that you have to evolve up into it though may be a bit awkward, and the deck space might be limited, but one of those things that's worth picking up, and it did come in pre-release kits, so you may already just have this if you went to a pre-release. Also going to recommend Scyther and Scissor. So Scissor has an attack that does 10 damage and then an extra 50 damage for each ability Pokemon your opponent has in play. So if they've got 6 guys that have abilities, you're doing 310. Gardevoir, everything on their bench has abilities. Chin Pao, we've already talked about. Everything on their bench has abilities. Abilities are, well, seeing a lot of play. It could just be a sneaky addition to have in decks, just costing 1 steel energy. It's not a bad trade-off, and a great single prize attacking option. Also getting a new Mawile that has an ability Special Eater. When you play it from your hand to your bench, discard a special energy from your opponent's active Pokemon. Very situational, has 90 HP though, so you can search it out with Level Ball, and if special energies start becoming more relevant, could definitely be an inclusion to have. We had a Giratina that had this ability previously, and it saw play, so Mawile just seems like a good pickup to have as well. Also getting a new Varoom that to me seems kind of like the optimal run to run. Only has 60 HP, so not big. So I could take 2 of these out with damage counters. That is a bit concerning, but the attack does 10 damage and lets you draw a card, and it only has 1 retreat cost. So in decks that are running Revaroom, or even if you try and build Revaroom EX, I think this is the Varoom to go for in that situation. The new tool cards in the set as well. Tool cards, also one of those things I'd recommend just picking them up unless they seem really bad. These two, they seem quite situational, so I think they're worth having. I wouldn't go out of your way to get them. If you pull them from packs though, definitely worth keeping. And if you're trying to just pick up singles, yeah, probably just pick them up to be safe. The first one, Patrol Cap, if it's attached to your active Pokemon, prevents your opponent from, well, milling your deck. If they try and discard cards from your deck, Patrol Cap just says, nah, don't do that. And Vengeful Punch, if the Pokemon this is attached to gets knocked out, put 4 damage counters on the Pokemon that hit it. So that's pretty solid. We have Rocky Helmet that's just every time it gets hit, you put damage counters on them. Vengeful Punch, you need to get fully knocked out for it. Like, there may be a better option already, but I could definitely see this seeing some play in specific decks. 2 new supporter cards as well. Poppy, that lets you move 2 basic energy from one of your Pokemon to another one. So if you've overcommitted energy, decks like Arceus, where you want to be attacking every turn and accelerating energy out from your deck, Maybe you don't have another attacker on your bench to be charging up. You just overcharge the energy to the Arceus or an attacker that already has energy. Later in the game, just use Poppy, move it on there. Or if you've tanked a hit with a guy, you want to switch out into a different one and just move the energy with Poppy. I could definitely see it seeing play. Probably just need one copy, but pick up two because you never know. Same with Rhyme. It's a draw 3 supporter, but it does have a secondary effect that's going to force your opponent to switch out their active Pokemon with one of their bench. So sort of like Escape Rope, but it's only affecting your opponent, which is kind of cool. I like that we're seeing more of these draw 3s with secondary effects instead of just cards like Hop and How, where it's just, hey, draw 3. We've got Rhyme, we've got Worker, we've got Avery. It's cool, and I like that we're getting more straight draw power cards. Next, we're going to be covering the cards that are a bit more deck specific. First one being the Charizard line. I'm going to recommend it as a 4-1-2 line. Maybe able to go 4-1-3 if you want to be more on the safe side, but I don't really think you need 3 Charizards, and it's likely going to be a kind of costly card. I'm kind of holding out that it's going to be the free card on PTCGL ladder. It's the flagship Pokemon for the set. We've kind of seen that for the previous ones, like we got Chin-Pao with Paldea Evolved, we got Lugia in Silver Tempest, so I feel like we're going to get a Charizard deck as the main Battle Pass deck. So if you want to play it online, test it out before buying the physical cards, highly recommend it. It does seem like it'll be a powerful deck, but again, this is just if you specifically want to run that deck, pick up those cards. Next one being Toedscruel, so likely get a 4-3 line of that. Toedscruel has a very interesting ability that prevents your opponent's attacks from having effects on your Pokemon as long as they've got energy attached to them. So if Sableye can't put damage counters out, on them, Giratina V-Star can't use Star Requiem to just knock you out. They have to just be doing straight damage. Secondary effects are just kind of useless as long as you have energy attached to them. It does seem like an interesting deck in there as well. So it does a base damage of 80 and then scales up for each of your Pokemon on the bench that have energy attached to them. We've got things like Cherrim that can accelerate a bunch of grass energy out to your Pokemon. Toedscruel being an EX Pokemon as well. So before it evolves up, you could just be cheating energy to pay the attack cost onto it, then evolve up afterwards, since Cherrim can't attach to Rule Box Pokemon. So that's kind of where my head's at for building that list. Also getting the new Glimmora EX that has an ability when it's in the active. Your opponent has to discard their bench until they only have 3 Pokemon in play. Seems like an interesting partner for Ting-Lu since you would just kind of switch between the two. Chuck Glimmora on the active, mess up their bench, go back to Ting-Lu. Their Pokemon don't have abilities and it just kind of gatekeep. It's a little bit funny and definitely a fun card to play around with. Probably just pick it up as a 2-off, but it's more so, again, if you're just wanting to build that deck. The new Reveroom EX also looks very interesting, having an ability similar to Honchkrow V that we had, where you could put 4 Pokemon tool cards onto it. We are getting a tool card in 151 that makes it so Stage 1 Pokemon take 30 less damage from attacks, so you could put 4 of that onto this, takes 120 less. It's attacked as a base damage of 170, and then it takes 30 less damage from attacks, so 150 all up in a perfect situation. It's kind of funny. Combi and Vespiquen also seems like a potential deck in there. Does 200 damage for 3 grass and lets you put 3 damage counters on all of your opponent's Pokemon. Single prize decks like Lost Box will slowly get wiped out. It's damage counters, not damage, so Manaphy doesn't protect them. A little bit cheeky. And the fact that it is an EX, similar to how we said with Toedscruel, you could be using Cherrim to cheat this energy out ahead of time. Could also run it with Fortress to just blow it up, accelerate energy out, or use Gardenia's Vigor to just try to hopefully have energy in hand to attach to your bench guy and then get into the active. Gardenia is a little bit awkward, so probably go for one of the other 2 options. The new King Gambit card also being an interesting rogue deck to play around with, likely get it as a 4-1-4 line. King Gambit for just 1 steel energy. If your opponent's Pokemon has 4 damage counters on it, just knock it out. It's kind of clutch, combines very nicely with that tool card we mentioned earlier. Getting a new Scavillion that is fire and grass type simultaneously. Its attack is grass, double colorless, does 110 damage. It's covering 2 typings. Seems like an interesting inclusion for Zorobox decks. Give it super effective glasses, triple that damage to 330. You're covering 2 typings and one-shotting stuff. It's pretty clutch. We're also getting an Altaria that I feel like will fit right in Regidrago V-Star decks. It does 110 damage, puts your opponent's Pokemon to sleep, and they have to flip 2 coins between turns to see if they wake up. If either of them is tails, they stay asleep. So do a little bit of damage. It's not big, but then follow up the next turn with like a 200 damage attack like Rolling Iron or G-Max Pulverization to finish them off and just kind of keep cycling that. So yeah, you are 2-hitting into things, but ideally your opponent's not even getting 1 hit off on you because they're asleep and then they're dead. And then you just do that to the next thing and then the next thing and then the next thing. And the last few cards I want to cover is ones that I think might see play in GLC, or Gym Leader Challenge if you're not familiar with it. It's a very interesting format. You only get to play one type of Pokemon in decks and just has one-off copies in them, so pretty fun. And as every set comes out, we are getting a few more pieces that seem like they'd be right at home in deck lists. So there is the Tadbulb and Bellybolt cards. Tadbulb does 20 damage and then 10 damage to one of your opponent's Pokemon, like one of their bench guys, so a little bit of spread damage. And then when it evolves into Bellybolt, 70 damage and then 30 to one of their bench guys. So I feel like it'll be right at home in certain electric builds. So you can kind of make them, well, spread damage or snipe damage. Since there's a Tapu Koko that does 20 damage to all of your opponent's Pokemon, there's also an Electivire that does 50 damage to all of them. So if you kind of just want to go for like a zap the bench deck, I feel like we're getting pieces to make that a little bit more possible every set. The other lightning Pokemon I could see seeing some play GLC is the new Electros. So Electrike seeing a lot of play since it can just accelerate energy from the discard to the bench. Having an evolution to be able to do some attacking is always pretty clutch. And this one lets you switch in one of your opponent's bench Pokemon into the active spot, do 60 damage to it, then flip a coin, and if it's heads, they're paralyzed. So not big damage, can do a little bit of stall. It's an interesting option. The secondary attack doing 130 damage for a lightning double colorless, and you could just be accelerating energy to itself before it evolves up. It's definitely a consideration. Probably not super optimal. We do have other Electros that seem a little bit more relevant. There's one that has an ability that can just come out from your hand to the bench if you have enough lightning in play, but this is definitely one that may be worth playing around with. The new Entei as well that could see play in fire types decks. Its ability makes your opponent's active Pokemon's attacks do 20 less damage to you. And then its attack is a base of 60 damage and then 20 more damage for each fire energy attached to this. So if you're paying the attack cost with 3 fire energy, that's 120 as a base damage, and you can scale it up even further. On a basic Pokemon, it's pretty clutch. Welder and Blacksmith, as well as Magma Base, all being able to be played in GLC, you can quickly get that energy out there and do some pretty silly numbers. Also getting a new Stunfisk card. It's got an ability Custom Trap. If it's in the active spot and gets damaged by an attack, you get to put 5 damage counters on the attacking Pokemon. 120 HP, it's not too small. You can also be giving it like Bravery Charm and Cape of Toughness to bump that up to 170, since you do need to have a Pokemon Tool card on there, and that seems kind of like the play there. Fighting types, you could be giving it Stone Energy, so it takes a little bit less damage from attacks. Just make it tank a few hits, then without even needing to attack. It's pretty clutch and just buys you a bit of time. Being a basic Pokemon too, you could use like Scoop Up Net or Penny or something like that, so it just tanks a few hits, get it out of the active. Maybe you've knocked something out without ever swinging. It's kind of funny. The attack Rumble, though, does 30 damage, and the defending Pokemon can't retreat during your opponent's next turn. In GLC, there's quite a few switch cards, but a lot of decks are heavily reliant on Floatstone. So if they're trying to retreat for free, you just go, no. And then they're stuck there and they have to hit you and get hurt. It's kind of funny. Also going to recommend picking up a 1/1 of the Palafin line for GLC. Seems like a great addition for water type decks. We did cover it a little bit earlier, so I'm not going to go through that one again, but definitely a clutch card to have. That's it for the cards I'm going to recommend from Obsidian Flames though. There's not heaps. It's an interesting set. I'm not too sure how much it's going to shake up the meta though. Like Charizard definitely seems like a good Gita. I feel like is going to see some play, but other than that, it just feels a bit more geared towards collectors and like a bit of catch up from Japan. There's the starter decks that they had come out, so we've got a lot of that in this set. And the rest is just kind of, it's not bad, but compared to stuff we already have in the standard format, I don't really think things are going to be get replaced. If you're after the full list that I'm likely going to be buying though, it should be popping up on the screen right here. Remember though, a lot of this is deck specific, so if you have no intentions of playing decks like Vespiquen or Clefable, don't feel the need that you need to get them. Highly recommend picking up the staples and the ones that I said like are probably worth having in your collection, just because you never know down the line, hey, maybe Town Store becomes a super relevant stadium, goes from being a 50-cent card to like a $5 card. That always sucks, so I recommend picking them up usually within the first month of release. Once we see like prices will go up for a little bit, like at pre-release, but about 2 weeks after they kind of start to tilt off a little bit. So wait a week or two, look into picking up some singles, and this is going to be the list I'd recommend. If there's any cards that you feel like I missed or are pretty confused why I would even include them on here, let me know in the comments down below. But if you enjoyed this video or it helped you out, hitting that thumbs up button's a great way to let me know, and subscribing is a great way to support the channel. Nice thing is, it doesn't even cost you anything. It's greatly appreciated if you do. Till next time though, take care of yourselves.